California Light and Space started in the mid-60s. It was just a collection of artists working in Southern California who wound up being interested in a lot of the same things. The sobriquet Light and Space is very descriptive, actually, because those were their materials. So these works they're environmental, they're ambient, they're very minimal. Many of these works involve moving around them, and your relationship changes, kind of the physical relationship and also the visual relationship shifts over time. There's a subcategory of light and space called finish fetish, or LA glass and plastic. Both pretty odd terms for describing, and some people say derogatory terms for describing an art movement, which is actually very telling because it gives you a sense of what the attitude was towards California minimalism. These artists were very much working in a minimalist idiom, but instead of being very concrete and material and literal, the way a New York minimalist work is, such as Donald Judd or Carl Andre, the light and space artists were working with ephemeral materials. The qualities of those materials are very much, they're reflective, they play with transparency. Oftentimes, they were also dealing with geometric shapes. Some of the things that the current generation artists in this show have in common with California Light and Space is, you have a lot of ambient materials, atmospheric pieces, artists working with mist, and different kind of manifestations of light, whether it's taking the color temperature of shadows in Paris and translating them into a color spectrum, or focusing on this old lighthouse while the sun is setting. Tacita Dean is an artist I've been interested in for a long time. Her work obviously has not really been talked about in relation to California Light and Space or phenomenology, to my knowledge, but certainly her concern with light, time, and especially this idea of slowing down time is very sensitive to the subjectivity of the viewer. There's something about works like her film and also atmospheric pieces or environmental works or works that are reflective where, if you're not there to see yourself in the work, it's pointless. So I think that in the case of all the artists in this show, very similar to the light and space artists, they're always thinking of how do I create an experience for the viewer. People do talk about, in light and space works, light having an almost material presence. And you certainly get that in the Anne Veronica Janssen's and the Spencer Finch, which has a lot to do with the light in California, which is unlike any light that I've ever seen. It is very distinct. There's been some objective to linking California, the historical California light and space, to the weather, and the climate, and also cultural aspects like surfing and the kind of obsession with the automobile. Sarah Brayman's cube that seems to be acting more, like a giant tumbleweed in the gallery. She drives a lot, and she talks about the experience of being in the car, looking at the world passing by, the quality of light through the windshield, everything. She gets a lot of ideas for her sculptures that way. Coincidentally, Anne Veronica Janssen's talks about the experience of being in the car as feeding her work too. To show a light and space room-size installation piece is very complicated and expensive and would eat up a lot of space. But I did want to have an element of historical light and space works here in Edinburgh, because I know that this work is not that well known here. And so I decided, and we were lucky enough to find, in this case, Orange County Museum of Art. They were willing to let us borrow their Irwin disc. This marks the beginning of his letting go of being a painter. As one writer put it, he went from being a non-objective painter, in other words, abstract, to someone who was dealing with no objects at all and focus on site-specific works, on works that are, or as he puts it, site-conditioned, because he felt that you can't separate the artwork from the whole situation that it's in. The New York work was very photogenic, and at the other extreme, California light and space artists would not allow their work to be photographed because they felt it was a misrepresentation, because that work is very much about being there and about the optical and also the physical whole body experience of encountering the work. Many have made a case for the idea that California light and space, because of the interest in immateriality, which so many people talk about, the Larry Bell in particular that way. You know, it's at the point of the object disappearing altogether. And certainly the Carol Beauvais picks up on that idea. You have conceptual art, which was also wanting to dematerialize the art object, but I think for very different purposes, because that was more political. And the way light and space does it, and the way it appears in the work of current generation artists that have been influenced by it, it's about the materiality itself, the immateriality of the material.